Okay, we are live.
All right. Well, thank you all.
Wait, we're not, no.
Okay.
We're live
I'll
on
start.
YouTube, but no one's admitted yet. I'm glad you're excited
Sending
though.
that link out.
Do you have it, Bill? You're muted.
Yes, I have. We're live on YouTube. I see it here.
Okay, terrific. I'm going to
I'll
admit
power
everyone.
down and you can wake me up when it. All right. Do we have our guests here? Okay. Well, thank you all for joining me today. My name is Dan Silverman, and I'm a postdoctoral fellow in the Institute for Politics and Strategy, where I teach courses on international conflict, Middle East politics, and quantitative research methods. I'm pleased to welcome you to this special IPS event on Serbia and Kosovo diplomacy with Ambassador Richard Grinnell, who played a leading role in facilitating a major agreement between Serbia and Kosovo this past year. This should be a very interesting opportunity to get an inside perspective on that issue, how it came about, and what it means moving forward. As many of you know, we do a lot of interesting programming like this, so keep your eyes peeled for continued events this semester and beyond. We do also encourage you to follow us on social media. We're at CMU IPS everywhere. I'll say just a few words to introduce our speaker today. Ambassador Richard Grinnell joined the Institute for Politics and Strategy in July of this year. In his role as a senior fellow, he will develop projects concentrating primarily on the New Europe and the global campaign to decriminalize homosexuality. Prior to joining IPS, Ambassador Grinnell served as ambassador to Germany, presidential envoy for Kosovo, Serbia, and acting director of national intelligence. In that role, which he held from February to May 2020, Grinnell oversaw the 17 agencies in the intelligence community and served as principal advisor to the president and the National Security Council on intelligence matters. During his short tenure, Grinnell focused on reforming the office of the DNI, moving it toward an agency that coordinates intelligence rather than functioning as a competing body. As U.S. ambassador to Germany from May of 2018 until May 2020, Grinnell pressed Germany to increase its defense budget to meet NATO guidelines and work to ensure the security of shared intelligence as the nation fielded bids for 5G mobile internet infrastructure. So I'll turn it over to our IPS program manager, Ali Freimeyer, who will share a few housekeeping items before we get started.
Thank you so much, Professor Silverman. And thank you so much to Ambassador Grinnell and for all of you for joining us this afternoon. Before we get started, there will be a Q&A portion of the event. And so if you would like to ask a question, please use the raise hand function. If you're able to turn on your video cameras when you ask your questions, please do so. If you are not comfortable asking a question live, please send it to me in the chat as a private message, and I will relay that question on your behalf. Please leave your microphones muted throughout the duration of the talk unless you are asking a question. And so with that, I will turn it over to Ambassador Grinnell.
Well, thanks, Dan, and thanks, Ali, so much for putting this together. I have to say this is very exciting for me because the portfolio of Kosovo and Serbia has been incredibly exciting for me. I started off kind of stumbling on this initiative. I was the U.S. ambassador to Germany at the time when just out of the blue, both sides separately, a team from Serbia and a team from Kosovo had reached out to me to say, hey, we understand you're close to President Trump and to the Secretary of State. We would like to get some high-level attention to talk about our issues. And so as U.S. ambassador to Germany, I checked with the National Security Council head at the time and was told, hey, go and explore with both sides what they're looking for, and just have an initial meeting. And so, as U.S. Ambassador to Germany, I hosted in Berlin both sides to come and just have an initial talk. And we really tried in the very beginning to downplay any expectations, just to meet face to face and to talk. And what I quickly found in meeting with both sides, at the time it was the president of Kosovo and the president of Serbia, I found them both to be frustrated with the international community and ready to talk. And also, more importantly, and I think this is the thing that I focused in on, and what President Trump really thought was worth a shot, was that both sides really talked about future growth and economic development and young people not having jobs, and a kind of a frustration that there was not a focus on developing the region. And so from my perspective, that was exactly kind of the secret sauce, so to speak. Both sides were longing for something that both each other could agree on. And so I saw some very early signs that we could make progress. So I decided to have a conversation with the president and lay out what I had seen from the two sides, and some initial assessments. I should say too that we had a very good team from the State Department that was helping both in Washington, and we selected a smaller team in Berlin from my current staff at the embassy. As many people know, most Foreign Service officers move around every 3 years. And so there were more than a handful of embassy staffers in Berlin that had worked in the Balkans. Some had even worked in Kosovo and Serbia. And so there was a sense that we had the expertise, but also I think there was an agreement that the experts for the past 20 years have focused largely on the political issues. And we weren't at that point of creating a political solution. What we were waiting on, and what I think both sides were waiting on, is economic solutions. How do you get people jobs? How do you get people more excited about the future, so that they're not just lingering on the past? And so when I talked to the president and relayed what I thought was an opening on the economic front, he had a couple of ideas to try in terms of growing an economy and trying to message to the business community, to the private sector community, that although they keep hearing about a conflict between Serbia and Kosovo, that the reality is that both sides were trying to work together. And so this perceived conflict was a real conflict in the business community's mind, because they didn't understand the disagreements, how much they went, how complicated it was. And so we began to talk to the private sector community. I took, shortly after the initial meeting in Berlin, I took trips to Kosovo and Serbia, and there, I stumbled upon this issue in that, in going to Kosovo and Serbia to have meetings, we realized in planning the trip that you couldn't fly from Pristina to Belgrade, that there was no flight that existed, and that KFOR, the NATO force that was controlling the airspace, did not allow commercial flights, for the past 20 years. And so I thought, wow, if we can't fly, obviously that means there's a whole bunch of businesses that can't fly between the two, and commerce is really stuck. And so we were able to focus the business community in Belgrade and Pristina on solutions. And so the first meeting that I did in landing in both Pristina and Belgrade was to get off the plane and go meet with the private sector community. And remarkably, the chambers of commerce on both sides were already secretly working together. They were talking and trying to figure out, how do you grow a region? I think because they realize, the chambers realize, that commerce doesn't stop at the border. If you want to grow your company, it's got to be borderless. And so they were working together already, but they immediately said, cargo is sometimes 4 or 5 hour delay at the border. There's no flight. It's really a problem to get the normalization of commerce. And so in our first discussions, I laid out a vision for both sides and said, look, this is going to be a different negotiation because we're not going to talk about the political issues that you all have been talking about for 20 years. What we believe is that if you want some help from the United States and from the international community, that let's concentrate on the economic side. Let's concentrate on growing your economies and giving your young people jobs so that they don't move to Hungary and Poland and Germany, but that they stay in the region. And the excitement that that vision cast to the private sector community was really palpable. And people were very excited to work and come forward with ideas. And so initially we focused on what we saw as the problem, which was an air link between Pristina and Belgrade. And so we worked with the German airline Lufthansa and some others to figure out, why couldn't we have, many airlines fly from Belgrade to other cities and from Pristina to other cities. So we knew that it was doable. And we certainly knew that NATO and KFOR was pretty focused on the safety of the skies. And so we knew it wasn't a safety issue, that it was just a 20+ year problem. And so we decided to tackle it. And those negotiations were tough because many of the words that we were trying to use, for instance, in even calling the two the sides countries, it was controversial. And trying to get the right words and verbiage so that we could get people to the table to accept kind of a non-political strategy of working on the economic side. That was difficult in the beginning, but we were able to get an air agreement, the first ever. It's not opened up yet. I think it would have been if not for COVID, but we certainly had NATO, Lufthansa, Serbia, Kosovo, and the airline authorities on each side, all in agreement of how we can move forward and have the first ever flight between Belgrade and Pristina. And so we have that agreement and are still trying to implement it. Because of COVID, we've been really hindered. We also powered through on a motor agreement and a railway agreement, so that it wasn't just economic development between the two sides via airplane, but also rail. And that's an important, in that part of the world, railways are incredibly important, except some of the tracks and systems are not up to current standards. And so it's a slow system and those would need to be upgraded. And so we had a vision and an agreement for how to get a railway and a motor agreement. So with those three agreements, by the way, I will say, we signed the last of those agreements at the Munich Security Conference in a historic meeting there between the two sides. And then we went into really the pre-COVID. So it was like November, December, I think, January, when we signed the final one. We went into this season having three very good economic agreements. And we felt like that was the basis for doing the larger agreement, which would name a whole bunch of economic development projects. And for that agreement, that big, what we call economic normalization agreement, we really needed the US government agencies that would be involved to dig deep on the funding. So Import-Export Bank was important, DFC, the Development Fund, they were very important. USAID was very important. All of the different arms of the US government needed to come together. And some of the economic projects that we were talking about related to different departments, US departments. Like for instance, there's a lake that is largely in Kosovo, but also is in Serbia, and the lake is underutilized. It's not being utilized for energy issues. Certainly we think that there could be some development, maybe a hotel, but some development around the lake so that it could be utilized not only for energy, but also for leisure. And so we needed to have a feasibility study to figure out, before we can talk about some of these projects, we need to know what we're working with. And so approaching the Department of Energy to say, would you fund a study, a feasibility study around this lake to figure out what, energy projects and how they could turn some of their natural resources into jobs. And so we concentrated on that. There's a mine that has not been developed. It was in the past, but has kind of gone by the wayside. So that needs to be redeveloped. There's a ski town, a little ski village that could be developed that would need a hotel. And so there were a lot of economic ideas. And one of the problems that we would get into as that we would talk about these economic development ideas is that then both sides would say, wait a minute, we own this and we don't want them to benefit, and we control this area and you're going to need. And so the political problems really began to creep in to the economic development aspect of this. And so it took us a long time to meet and to discuss these issues. Both sides were always, I think, cognizant of the political dynamics to the economic development. And so there were many times that we on the US side would just say, look, we don't want to tell you what to do. We're hopeful that you're here to find common agreement, but we don't want to get into the political issues. Many of the political issues too are also really European issues, because many of the political issues are wrapped in and around EU membership. And we were super sensitive to say, look, we have nothing to do with that. That goes through Brussels, that goes through Paris and Berlin and other places. You have to recognize that there are all those steps that the Europeans are going to require you to do. This is not that. This is not something that we want to get in front of the Europeans on. What we wanted to be able to do was show the US participation through economic development, which I tried to remind both sides, President Thaci mostly and President Vučić, that all of the economic development that can be done through the US government's help and guarantees are projects that they have to do. They have to find the political will to implement. But all of those projects are going to help them on the road to appealing to the Europeans for European membership if that's where they want to go. And so we kept Berlin and Paris, obviously the two main leaders on this issue, France and Germany. We kept their national security advisors apprised as to what we were doing and how we were developing our strategy. And we made clear along the way as much as possible that we were not talking about the political issues, that those were issues that they're going to have to talk to the Europeans about, but that this was exclusively economic development. And so we really, I think, made progress by being very firm in our focus on just the economic development projects. And the projects that we ultimately looked at and had the US government weigh in on, and the DFC and Exim Bank decided to fund, all of these projects required time of different agencies looking at each project to make sure that it was feasible. And that's what the diplomatic part was, and then getting the words right to describe them in the agreement. I'll just point out two things before we kind of open it up for questions. I ran a little bit longer than I wanted to. I'd like to get to questions as quickly as possible. But I will say that one issue that kept creeping into discussions, I would say, from people who had really nefarious motives, is this constant criticism that somehow we were talking about land swaps. And for anyone who knows, you know, the history and political dynamics of land swaps, it's obviously a very controversial and ugly subject. And it is not something that we ever dealt with. It was never discussed in my presence. Nobody ever asked about it. So it was just something that I could honestly and loudly keep saying and repeating, that land swaps were not a part of this at all. I've never heard anybody discuss it. We were focused on the economics. And yet that would creep in, and we'd hear these rumors that, oh, they had another discussion and they were talking about swapping land. And that just was never the case. So I wanted to make that point. The second point that I think from the economic normalization agreement that is really monumental, and the words are simple, but they were purposefully written simply because that was the best way to get agreement, is that both sides agreed to diversify their energy sources. And for Serbia, that's a very big deal, because currently 100% of their energy comes from Russia. And so having the Serbs commit to diversifying, what that really means is they are committing to pull away from getting 100% of their energy from Russia. And that's a very good move, I think, because even in Europe, when we talk about Nord Stream 2 or Nord Stream 1, the European Parliament is very clear that they believe that diversification of Europe's energy sources is crucial. And many people use that word crucial to mean that it must be done in order to allow the Europeans and individual European countries to have the freedom that they need politically. And so we were very proud, and they were tough negotiations, and yet President Vučić committed to diversifying Serbia's energy sources. I might add that it's a very good thing for the Serbian people and for the region to have diversified energy. And all that means is that they're going to get their energy from a variety of sources in a variety of countries. Certainly we know the Middle East provides quite a bit of alternative for countries in the region, certainly for the Europeans. And so we believe that there should be a variety. That does not mean that the US would come in and supply all of the energy. It means that it will be diversified, and that everybody would have a little piece. And the goal of that obviously is very clear, so that each country can feel the freedom to make its own political decisions without having to feel the leverage of energy, which is something that we all have to deal with on a daily part of our lives. So I'm very proud of the agreement. The agreements obviously are very detailed, and we can get into them in more detail, or we can stick to kind of the diplomatic process. But I'm eager to kind of hear your questions and help you all understand the diplomacy aspects to how we got the agreements.
All right, thank you so much, Ambassador Grinnell. Very interesting, educating me on some of these specifics. So I'll take the first question or two, doing what our Colin Clark, one of my colleagues, often calls moderator's privilege here. I guess to start, I think it's probably fair to say that, you know, many of us in this event really don't know that much about Serbia and Kosovo, right? I think you can reasonably call it an understudied or underappreciated area on the global stage. So why is it so crucial? What are the strategic and broader economic geopolitical issues at stake here? Can you get into that a little bit in outlining where this fits into a broader picture as we think about it might be worth touching on that. So yeah, I wanted to give you a chance to do that.
Great, thank you. Well, first of all, I think an easy answer is that they're both in Europe, right? They're both part of Europe, but they're not a part of the EU. And so we have really tried, we, the US, has really tried to cultivate all parts of Europe. You know, sometimes we get in trouble when we say Eastern Europe because they say, no, we're Central Europe. So I would just say Eastern and Central European friends and allies. And I think strategically Serbia and Kosovo, as part of the Balkans, are really a strong region that can be allies, greater allies. They certainly are allies now, and they can be greater allies. They've got people that are eager to be a part of Europe, part of the EU, but they are European. When you go to Pristina and when you go to Belgrade, it feels like a great, big, amazing European city. And so as an American, I think when you go there, you're like, this is amazing. This is great. This is, you know, freedom and democracy and the rule of law. And of course, we can banter about how they all need to move closer to kind of the rule of law and to push forward. Certainly, we've got this whole issue with the international courts that are controlling some of the issues. I'm a believer that both Serbia and Kosovo should be able to handle their own court systems. The United States has been for a very long time trying to mentor judges and have bilateral programs in both Serbia and Kosovo. And so I believe that after all of these years, we need to move both of them into handling their own court systems and problems, and that the rule of law should be internally and not be based at The Hague, not have an international court systems flavor to all of their issues. And certainly we, the United States and the Europeans, would continue to work in a bilateral way with both Kosovo and Serbia to reach that point where they are, you know, governing their own rule of law. And I think it's time that we move in that direction. And so I think that's a long answer to say that it really does feel like you're in Europe, because you are, and that many Americans are more shocked when they go to the Balkans and they see this, you know, region that is just flourishing. I think many Americans have in their mind a 20-year ago time clock when thinking about the Balkans. And it goes back to what I said at one of the problems that we had with the business community, which was this perceived conflict. You know, we still have 600 plus troops, US troops in Kosovo. And so I think we should really begin to look at that and to say, let's move this region away from the international emergency room situation and move it to what we know they can do is be on their own. And I do think, you know, I served at the UN for 8 years, and watching the Security Council deal with failed states, I do think that the international community has to do a better job of figuring out when Do you move that patient in an emergency room into a normal room and then into maybe care outside that friends and family can kind of check on and help, and that the person can begin to get on their feet and have their own life. And that's an analogy for countries, but I think it works in many ways, because the Security Council is an emergency room for failed states.
A lot there, very interesting, touching on the potential of those of the area economically, strategically, in terms of human rights. Let's one more. I'll take one more that I think is a natural that your remarks naturally lead into, to open it up a little bit, which is, I think, the heart of the matter, digging into this sort of economics first approach that was successful here and maybe we should consider as a template for additional future diplomacy, international diplomacy. I want to think about the logic of this approach. So you talked about a little bit. Can you explain why you think this is effective? And especially, I think the interesting thing is a possible worry here is that, as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, there are commitments made by the U.S. government to help finance these development projects and to pour in money and expertise that will help the economies grow with rail links and other things. It's different. I'm more of a Middle East expert. It contrasts with some of the classic Middle East peace deals between Israel and Jordan, Israel and Egypt, where there's more of a sustained aid, foreign aid investment, $3 billion a year to Egypt, and so on and so forth. So the question is, how is this sustainable? And not that it isn't. I think there are good arguments for why it may be, but what are the forces that you see potentially sustaining an agreement when you do this economic first approach? I'd be curious to hear a little about.
Yeah. Dan, it's such a great question. I think you hit on one of the vulnerabilities that we've been very well aware of. We've been cognizant of the fact that when you concentrate just on the economics, there is a vacuum on the political side that you have to be very sensitive to. Certainly, we know that the political issues are not just symbolic and are serious, and that the UN can play a role and has tried to play a role. I think it has to play a better role in kind of reconciliation. But I say this with 20 plus years of diplomatic experience. I did not want the Serbia-Kosovo agreements to follow the Middle East style agreements of decades of American foreign policy money and control. And I think that from my standpoint, that is one of the very big upsides to America First and to the Trump administration's foreign policy push, which is to respect other countries enough to say, you determine what's best for you. You get to determine that. We're not going to tell you. I mean, there is a whole crowd in Washington, D.C., and I know this goes on a different debate, but there's a whole crowd of political foreign policy experts in Washington, D.C. and NGOs that love to control every single issue. I think we saw it with a recent statement from Jake Sullivan, who is the new Biden National Security Advisor pick, who immediately started talking about some African issues as a priority, saying, we want to see more progress and we're going to be watching. I actually just feel like the U.S. needs to stop being the leader in every single conflict around the world, because what happens is that the regional players drop back and they don't come to the table with money. They don't come to the table with ideas because they're waiting for the U.S. to take the lead. I see that in the UN certainly all of the time. And so on this particular issue, I wanted the patient to get up and walk. and to try as much as possible after 20 years to say, and this is because I see the people, and I see the people hungry for freedom and wanting to have businesses come in, and they're hungry to work. And so we don't want a kind of cycle of dependency on our foreign aid. And so we were very cognizant to always say that, you're a part of Europe. Political issues are going to be on the EU path, but we want to be able to do some initial seed money. Now, I'll finish with this, is that inherent in our strategy is absolutely the private sector coming in and being a part of these projects. We're already seeing that happen. Europeans. I've talked to a lot of European CEOs. It's a fly. A lot of European CEOs. I see, the Emiratis and a lot of Middle Eastern businessmen who are very interested in being a part of this, as well as Central and Eastern Europeans. And so I think that we're going to have the private sector community there. They're very excited about different aspects of these individual projects, but having the U.S. government commit and saying we're here for a short time to give some seed money and to have guarantees, which is what DFC does in many cases. This is a very good thing for the region to kickstart it. And let's give it a shot. Certainly, we know that for 20 years trying to concentrate on the political issues has not worked. Very
interesting. I like the seed money analogy, and so we touched on where it fits in a sort of broader foreign policy, American strategy debates, but I liked your answer at the end as well, that you see the business communities in each country as well as some of the local forces maybe exchange of populations in terms of not land, but more interchange and sort of conciliation being part of that solution. So
yes, and I think if I can add to that, because that's the political will from each side that we need, because we can't do this. The United States cannot do this unless both parties say, oh yeah, this is a good idea, which is why all of the economic issues that we started with, and we had many more than what we agreed upon, but all of those issues were brought to the table by one side, or sometimes both sides brought an aspect of it. But that's how we wanted to do it. I had very little push. I did bring up to both sides, only because both sides were very open and amenable in the lead up to this, and I knew it would not be a problem, but I did push for both sides to work together on the decriminalization of homosexuality around the world. And that's part of the agreement. And that for me was an easy one, because in my conversations with President Vučić, he was totally supportive, as everyone knows. His prime minister, the number 2, is Anna. She is lesbian, and she and her wife are great friends of mine. And then on the Kosovo side, President Thaci and a variety of leaders from Kosovo, Prime Minister Hoti, have all said, we absolutely want to have a welcoming and diverse LGBT community in Kosovo. And President Thaci went to the Gay Pride Parade and Festival in Pristina. And so I knew that both sides were eager to make progress on this. And so that's the one thing I put into the agreement.
Very nice. Well, I think everyone doesn't want to hear from me anymore as much as they'd like to get into it and ask their own questions. So Ali will help to manage that. And please follow the house rules as you do so.
Thank you so much. We're going to start with our first question from Maxwell Plottle.
Hi, Ambassador Grinnell. Thank you so much for coming today. So my question, I read an article in New York Times over the summer discussing the progress you had made in Serbia and Kosovo in the negotiations. And I found this article a bit strange because it discussed that for the first time in decades, there had been progress in the negotiating field, and but then it took, it said you had like, seemingly annoyed the Europeans while making progress, taking a new approach. And this really confused me because for decades, this negotiation seems stalled, and then you take a new approach, it shows progress, and then everyone seems to be up in arms about how you can't make a change and everything. I'm just wondering why you may feel, and did you feel this in negotiations, that there's so much intransience in terms of foreign affairs negotiating in trying new methods when things seem to be broken?
Yeah, so I mean, great question. Look, I in my 25-year diplomatic career, I have been inside the Security Council. I've watched negotiations on Iran or North Korea or Iraq, and only to come out and to go to the press and to have a completely different story be told by the press of what we saw on the inside. Look, I'm very passionate about this, and this is my 25-year history of dealing with the press. I think that we have to all understand that all reporters are biased, that there is not a single reporter who comes to the table without bringing and bias is not always negative, right? Bias just needs to be upfront. And we need to be able to admit that reporters bring in their world experience like we do. I bring in my own world experience. But that for me just means that the consumer of news has to be responsible for getting more of the story and not just having one source. If you get your news from one single source, I think you're doing yourself a disservice. You really need to have multiple news sources. And so I would say that we did get criticism that we weren't on the same path or with the Europeans on something, but we did keep certainly the Germans and the French involved. They knew all of the steps that we were making. I think the very real issue for many people in Serbia and Kosovo when it comes to the EU process is I think there's no question they would love to be a part of the EU, both sides, but they're getting frustrated that this steps towards the EU is taking too long, and it's also not specific, or it's not known as to what needs to happen before they go to the next step. And so the frustration was very real. And what we had to do is constantly educate reporters who did not work very hard to get into the details that we weren't doing the EU process. We weren't, and maybe I should say too, I should have said this in the beginning. In the past, the political issues were the US helping the EU process, and it was all one thing. And so we were kind of bifurcating it a little bit into economics. And in many ways, our strategy was an admittance that the political issues were very difficult and stuck. And we were trying to figure out, how do you unstick this situation? And so, for instance, the New York Times reporter that the report that you're talking about, I didn't talk to that reporter, and so they didn't have the benefit of knowing exactly what we were doing.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, the article could have definitely used a little more firsthand knowledge when I read it.
Thank you. Our next question will come from Rich DeClaudio.
Thank you. And thank you, Ambassador. Nice to see you again. I've actually had a chance to travel extensively over the last 10 years throughout all of those countries, staying,
Lucky you.
I have to say, I think they're beautiful and the people are really great. But, when you're driving from Croatia through Bosnia to Serbia or Montenegro, you have all these border issues. Yet the people themselves seem incredibly joyful and open. And it kind of reminds me of when I first went to Poland like 25 or 30 years ago. You could feel the buzz of
Yeah.
like the economy, kind of shaking off the the last vestiges of communism, and there just seems to be this opportunity for rapid growth. The people seem to have less of an issue than the government, so that people do. So have you found that by taking the commercial approach, that first of all, you find that the people in both of those two countries seem much more open to looking for ways to do business? And then how about the surrounding countries like Serbia, Montenegro? I mean, there's some like, is Montenegro a separate country? And then Bosnia has some, they're pretty cranky about some things Serbia has done. So like, does it just start with those two, or do you start trying to normalize across multiple borders the commerce in that area to drive political change, because commerce will drag it along?
Yeah, very interesting questions. Well, first of all, on the second part, I think, yeah, you do start with Serbia and Kosovo, because I think that's where the conflict, I think, was, I'll just say, materialized. And so I think solving some of these issues that are hard issues will definitely benefit the region. There's no question about that. I love your analogy about Poland, because I think it's really true. The people of the region, and let me just speak specifically about Serbs and Kosovars and Albanians in Kosovo, there's an eagerness to have a normal job that can pay for their entire family and to raise their family in the region that they love and in the area that they love. And that touched me in so many ways, which is why I think when we went, it was criticized at first when we got off the plane in both Serbia and Kosovo. We went to the business community first. We went to the private sector community first. I did not go to the presidential palace or meet with government officials first. We wanted to hear from the business community as to say, what do you need? Like, what's your frustration? We heard from a car rental company that was like, we rent in this, we can rent a car to a family in this country, and they can't go across the border. And, they're stuck. It's not something that they will return to do because it was so frustrating. And so I began to see how the political issues were really holding back the economy. And interesting enough, I love your bifurcation of the people in the government too, because I think that's a very real thing. The government is obviously and rightly focused on the political issues. But when you create, and what I tried to do is speak to the media and speak to the people as much as possible to create the vision, which is we're going to help bring companies, European and American companies here, to create jobs so that your children no longer have to move to Hungary to have a job, or to Germany. And that is a powerful message for the region and for Europe. And so I think that we were successful in that the vision was something that both sides were hungry for, and that it was kind of right there. It wasn't really rocket science. It was just difficult on the political side to say, nope, we're not going to do the political issues, which the media and the political types all want you to do, because that's how they raise money. That's how they write pieces, and that's their livelihood. In some ways, the issue going away ruins industries. Certainly, we can see that in Washington. And so I was very comfortable with focusing on what both sides, what the people on both sides were trying to tell us, which is, can't we just kind of move on and have jobs and have a life? And when I went to Pristina and went to Belgrade, I just fell in love with both cities. I mean, they're so fantastic, and I couldn't go enough. And everywhere I went, it wasn't political. It was, thank you for helping bring jobs, and thanks for moving us forward. Yes, you always get some people who want to talk about the conflicts of the past, and I don't want to minimize them. They're very real, but there's a lot of people working on those and not too many people working on the economics.
Thank you. We're going to jump to a question that came in through the chat and then get back to the folks who are asking their questions live. This question is, to what extent would promoting the normalization of economic relations better help resolve the deep political dispute between Kosovo and Serbia?
It's what we've been talking about. And I would say that we have to be sensitive that solving the economic issues, or at least making progress on the economic issues, doesn't necessarily solve the political issues. We understand that. And those political issues that are very real and raw and more than symbolism have to be dealt with. And that's why I do think my idea of pushing both sides to bring their legal systems in-house, so to speak, and not have international courts. It's been 20 years, and the United States has spent, tens of millions, maybe even hundreds of millions of dollars on these international courts. And I think that we have to get to the point where the international community does this faster and allows countries to do reconciliation their way and internally. So I think it's going to help the political dynamics, but not always directly, I think tangentially.
Thank you. Our next question will come from Jonathan Ho.
Hi, thank you for having this talk. So I was going to ask you a more about you question. So you're known for working closely with the president and pushing a peace through strength approach and being very persistent in Europe. I was wondering, how do you think that your role in these transatlantic relations would change with the new presidency?
Sorry, you cut out there at the end. Just say that again.
Oh, sorry. How do you think that your role in these transatlantic relations will change with the new presidency?
Oh, with the new presidency. Well, I mean, certainly I think there's a recognition that they will change, right? When we have elections and there's a new president, there's a whole new team. And so there'll be a whole different set of perspectives. And I generally think that that's a good idea, to have different perspectives. I will say that I think Washington is not very good at welcoming different perspectives. They like people who are there, who are always there, who are at the social scene, and who they're comfortable with. And so I'm a believer that we've got to have outside perspectives and new ideas, and to be diverse, not have everybody who has the Washington, D.C. 20-year perspective on the Balkans. Because, I got myself into trouble when I said this, but I firmly believe it, that if we had an expert class that knew exactly what to do in the Balkans, we would have solved this 19 years ago. But the reality is that it's going on, and it's now this long industry, and people love to sit around and talk and write and talk and write, and there wasn't a lot of action. So I think that the perspective that we've brought to the region in terms of economics, and the 4 agreements are pretty large, and there's incredible excitement. I mean, the reality is, and this is very, very difficult with diplomacy, the reality is that both sides are really excited about these agreements. So it's going to be difficult to peel away and somehow change the perspective. Now, that's not to say that the new team that comes in can't say, well, the Trump administration was doing all economics, and now there's all this work to be done on the political side. Great. I think if you can do both, we feel good about moving the economic ball forward. Let's finish these projects. And as we've always said, it's going to help on the political side. If they feel that the time is now right to also move forward on the political side, my only suggestion, I know they would do this, is to make sure that the Europeans are in control on the political side, and that they obviously don't try to jam the Europeans. I mean, this is a EU membership. This would be like becoming a state. We certainly wouldn't want Europe telling us who should become a new 51st state. We would say, mind your own business. And so I'm sensitive to that when it comes to EU membership, that That's for the EU to decide, and so if the new administration believes that that's what they want to do, is bring in the political with this economic, I think that'll be great if they can accomplish both. But I don't think that you'll be able to leave the economic portion and all of the progress that we've made simply because both sides are really excited about something.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question will come from Denise Rousseau.
I think you're muted, Denise. I see
Somebody
you.
tells me that at least twice a day. Thank you. Ambassador Grinnell, very nice to hear you speak. Really appreciate you being here. Since we have people who are on this call who are students, I suspect with an interest in public affairs and perhaps going into the Foreign Service themselves, one of the things I was really struck by was the number of insights you have from being there. So rather than boots on the ground, it's dress shoes on the ground.
Oh,
and
this is such a great subject.
getting an idea. So what advice, what tips, what to do, what not to do in trying while you're there to understand what the situation is, what's going on?
Denise, I could write a whole book on this. I love this subject. I actually did, I would refer everybody, and maybe Ali, we could find it and send it. I wrote a piece, I believe it was in The Hill, about how the State Department and the Foreign Service should think about reform and changing. And it's exactly, Denise, I think what you're getting at, which is, look, I've been at the State Department for 11 years. I'm a big believer in the State Department. I don't think the State Department budget is big enough. I think we give too much money to DOD and the Pentagon, and we've created a system over the last 20 years where every problem is suddenly let's send in the troops and let's have DOD be in charge. I love having a Pentagon that has the latest and the greatest technology so that no one messes with us and that everybody knows that the United States is well prepared to kick your ass if that's what it comes to. But I think before we get to that point, we have to have a portfolio of State Department people who will parachute in and go into conflict areas. And we have these cones at the State Department. And if you're going to be a Foreign Service officer, you pick a cone. You pick an economic cone or a political cone or public affairs. There's all sorts of different cones. And I believe that we should have like a danger cone where we train diplomats who know the risk and who go in early and would go in early into Syria and sit around at a table and say, let's talk about these issues, because we can't send in the military first. They need to be last. And I don't think that you can send in the military without having diplomats with muscle. And that I actually believe that our diplomats can't be people who just have nice shoes and sit in Paris and have lunch and split the check. I think that we need to be having fewer people in the Foreign Service in European capitals and more people in the Foreign Service in danger zones and in growing economies. I also think that we should be doing less political reporting with our political officers at the State Department. At Embassy Berlin, we're very large, and we have a whole team of people that would go to every single political party and their conventions and report back and cables on everything that's going on. And I got to the point where I could read that in Deutsche Welle or the Politico or some, media outlet was reporting the same thing that was being reported inside our cables. Maybe we had a little different perspective with a quote from somebody, but it was largely the same message. And what I was trying to get our embassy to do is to think about serving the American people through economic development. And I think that our embassies should be mini chambers of commerce, and that we should be there and developing as much as possible jobs for Americans. That should be our focus. And there are a lot of Foreign Service officers who agree with me. And the economic cone at the State Department is filled with some of the smartest people. You would be so proud as an American taxpayer paying for these people. I jokingly have said to a number of people at Embassy Berlin, do you know how much money you could make in the private sector if you left the Foreign Service? Because you know everything about energy, or you know everything about whatever subject, cars, autos, trade. We have some of the smartest people, and yet that cone is pretty small. And I think it needs to be much bigger and much more prominent, and that our embassies can do that work overseas in a way that benefits the American people. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you so much. So we are right at time, but we have a few questions left. Can we take one or two more?
Let's do it. Let's take two more.
Okay, great. Our next question will come from Sujay Utkarsh.
Hello, I'm not turning my camera on because I look pretty terrible right now.
Sujay.
Yeah. So I find the economic approach really interesting, but my question is, why keep the EU separate on the political line? Because the EU is more than just a political entity; it's a common market, and nowhere is that more. And so I'd figure that if you, especially considering the history between Serbia and Kosovo, their big thing is getting recognized. There's 5 EU countries that don't recognize it, including Slovakia and Spain, and the EU envoy, like the members of those two, are from Slovakia and Spain. In addition to that, there's the issue that they had the 100% tariff against Serbia, and then Serbia has also been leading a campaign to make sure that Kosovo is not being recognized and is blocking them from entering international organizations. So why would leaving the EU out of that make sense on that spectrum? Shouldn't the United States and EU technically be working together as they have in the past to push this new economic agenda, and also like make it less, I guess, quote unquote, reductive if you're trying to trying to focus too much on the economic issue?
Yeah, Sujay, a very good question. First of all, I'll say we at the State Department, we do have a person who's in charge of the Balkans. So I was just doing Kosovo and Serbia, and we do have a person that is in charge of the Balkans, and he works very closely with the EU on exactly what you're saying, on moving towards what they can do economically and tying in the political stuff. So it's not like we were totally not working on the political side. It was just when it came to the Serbia-Kosovo negotiations, we were separating politics from economics. And that's just because we needed something to kickstart. And the reality is if I did both, we would come to the table and we would spend 90% of our time on the political issues. And I can guarantee you it would be like no progress or very little progress. But I felt like if we could change the paradigm a little bit by having some excitement about economics and job growth, that would have a direct benefit on the political situation later, whether it was through our conversations, the State Department conversations, or through the EU. I will also just say one thing, because you touched on the derecognition campaign. We did in the economic normalization, we did touch on some of the political issues, and one of them is the derecognition campaign. We got a year freeze from both sides on derecognition and seeking memberships, and so that's frozen for a year. Both sides have agreed not to do that. That's a big political win within the economic development, and that one of the reasons why we did that was that became, as you touch on, that became one of the sticking points on everything. If we were going to talk about the ski village or a railway agreement, it was, but they're trying this derecognition campaign. So we knew we had to remove that as an obstacle, and that took pushing. That was not easy. And the tariffs, as you know, took a lot of pushing, and we were held up for about 4 months of doing nothing because of the tariffs. So we did touch on the political issues, but we tried to make that an issue for the other State Department people.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you so much.
Our last question for the evening will be from Radisov, and I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce your last name, and I'm sorry if I butchered your first name.
Yeah, I'm a token representative from Pitt in this crowd, so I guess. Thank you, Alan. Thanks for the seminar and your point of view. I wanted to ask you about what is the legal status of these agreements? You know, are these kind of like just a agreement that either party can walk away from? Because I don't think U.S. signed any of these agreements, so it's just between these two parties, and they can honor or not honor them.
Yeah.
The other question is like this investment. You know, like I don't think any region ever profited or ever prospered from the foreign companies coming in, because the foreign companies coming in are there basically to reap the benefits from tax cuts, from subsidies, and the minute those are gone, they're going to pack up and leave. You know, they're not going to build a permanent business there forever and invest in the well-being of that community as long as the company's making profit. Yeah. And so, is that the idea of these agreements, that somebody's going to come from the outside with the investment? Or because then I would see that these parties will abide by these agreements and follow, but if not, then.
Yeah. Well, so the U.S. did not sign these, and that was purposeful on our part. We wanted to make sure that both sides were coming together with political will to make these agreements happen. And so again, the both sides brought their priorities to us in terms of economic development. So we knew that they were bringing not only their priorities, but with that, their political will, because it was their suggestions of what to do. And we knew that that's the only way that you're going to have agreements last anyways, is through the parties themselves saying, we want these to happen. Now, the stumbling block has always been on many of these economic development projects is that there wasn't seed money, there wasn't initial money, there wasn't investment from the United States. We did not want to fund all of these projects because, as you say, then we would get a whole bunch of American or European businesses, big, large corporations that would go in and do the initial, take the payment, and then there wouldn't be a long-term strategy. And so the long-term strategy that we have, it is combined with the political will, in that the private sector now has to come in with its own skin in the game. The American government is doing seed money, guarantees, and initial, and we now need to find partners for these. And we feel good about finding the partners, which already there's a ton of demand from the outside finance community, private sector to go after a lot of these projects, and we're thankful for that. But one of the reasons why that is because we selected projects that both sides were eager to do, and so you're going to have people in Serbia, businessmen in Serbia, who believe in these projects, who are going to join with the Americans to develop these projects. These projects were not American driven; they were really driven by the parties, and so we feel good that there will be political will to finish them.
Let's hope so. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We are unfortunately out of time to take any more questions, so I'm going to turn it back to Professor Silverman.
Thanks everybody for coming. I'll be brief. Yeah, it was a really interesting, wide-ranging discussion. I thought we got to delve into the specifics of the issue as well as talk about some broader visions of international diplomacy that were interesting. Talked about substance, talked about process. We hope to continue these conversations. Again, look out for more events. Specifically, we have a conversation with Barbara Barrett, Secretary of the U.S. Air Force, upcoming this Friday, the 4th at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. So we hope you join us for that one. And with that, it was a pleasure having you guys all here. And yeah, have a great